Our next speaker is Eric Karbowski. Eric is a community behavioral health extension educator focused on farm stress programming with Michigan State University Extension. Prior to this role, Eric was the executive director for the Department of Health and Human Services and supervised a program in the public mental health system for 10 years. Eric has a strong connection to the agriculture industry and brings his experience to support farmers and agribusiness professionals in self-awareness of stress to promote the health and well-being of farmers. Eric, thank you for joining us. You can begin sharing your screen whenever you're ready. And as a quick note, As a quick note for our attendees, we understand that this can be a difficult subject to discuss, and we welcome your questions. There's an option to submit your questions anonymously by checking a box in the Q&A window, so please feel free to use this feature if you feel more comfortable asking questions anonymously.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. One clarification, it wasn't for the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services that I was the executive director for. It was the Commission on Aging, but it was nice to have Katy Perry and Eye of the Tiger get everybody ready for our speak this afternoon. As Teresa said, my name is Eric Karbowski, and I wanted to just start off by saying thank you for being here this afternoon. This is not necessarily a difficult topic, and I always tell everybody, put your defense wall up for just a little bit, because not all of this is necessarily going to be easy conversation. Some of it might be very new to you. And so just take care of yourself, and I'll try and give you some prompts when we get into those. So just a brief background about myself. I share a little bit about myself just because I had kind of a unique path here. I really had no intentions of working in this role or in this setting, but I feel very privileged to be here today. Growing up, my grandparents were farmers, and I also married into a farming family. And so I recognize the hard work and the culture that is the farming community. In addition to that, I served in the public mental health system for 10 years. And I had the unfortunate experience, both personally and professionally, to see the impact of mental illness on a family, as well as loss of life by suicide. And so I share that with each of you, letting you know that I don't have all of the answers, and I don't want to present as having all of the answers. But on many levels, I can share some different experiences, and I recognize and empathize a lot with the work and trials and tribulation that you as farmers go through. And so today, in this short time, our goal is to help you understand some of the signs and symptoms of stress in agriculture, learn the 8 dimensions of wellness, learn how to ask open-ended questions, and improve some of your understanding of the warning signs of suicide, as well as some of the resources that are available to you. And so, as many of you are aware, agriculture is a stressful occupation. There are a lot of different demands that come physically, mentally, and emotionally that are involved in farming. And we recognize that. And that is why opportunities like this are so important, to be able to teach and talk about some of those skills and resources that are available. So farm stress, what we know. In 2017, there were 416 farmers or farm workers that died in work-related injuries. We also understand that opioid misuse in rural areas, 3 out of 4 farmers said that they would have access to opioids if they wanted or needed them. And then also, there oftentimes are inadequate medical presence that exists in the rural communities. And so with that, we wanted to try to make today as interactive as we could. And so we're going to put up a poll question right now. This is completely anonymous, so if you could just take a second and respond to that. And once we get the results, Christy's going to share those with us. All right. And I think the responses in this are very common. So 98% of you said that you are aware of a farmer that is experiencing stress. And I think that is a very common thing. And I think that's why the importance of opportunities like this are so valuable. And so when we talk about stress, one thing that really connects with a lot of the farmers and the agribusiness professionals that I talk with is this notion called the agrarian imperative. And really what this says is that the farmers are so deeply rooted and connected to their land that the thoughts of losing that would be the equivalent of maybe losing a loved one. And I always, oftentimes people think that it's generational farms that have this deep rooted connection. And in some ways, I challenge that to say that if you are a new farmer or a startup farmer, you too have all the emotional, financial investments in that property. And so I think when we think about this and we think about the stress that oftentimes farmers encounter, this gives us a good frame of mind to let people know, and I guess let the farmers know as well, that there is this next level of connection, this deep rooted connectivity to your livelihood and your occupation. And so defining stress, what is stress and how is it defined? For today, we're going to use this definition. Stress is defined as a need or demand people confront that is perceived as burdensome or threatening and can lead to physical or mental health problems. And so when we think about stress, I always encourage people to create some level of self-awareness. What do you know, or how do you know when you're feeling stressed? What are some of those physical, mental, or emotional signs? What does stress look like to you? What does it sound like to you? If somebody that knows you really well says, what would they say that you look like when you're under stress? I know that I'm a stress eater. And oftentimes, even though I've worked in the behavioral health field for over 15 years now, sometimes I struggle even seeing it myself. And sometimes it takes my wife to say, Eric, have you recognized this, this, or this? And that's kind of a cue for me to say, no, I didn't, but thank you. So now I can take this and I can get control over these different parts of my life that I can control. And so creating some level of self-awareness, if you take a second, just think about what are some of those things that create stress in my life? What does that look like? How do I react to it? Do I get aggressive? Do I get angry? Do I push away? Do I isolate myself from others? Those are all things to be aware of. And I think when you create that level of self-awareness, you're better able to help identify and support other people that are feeling signs of stress as well. And so when going through some different signs of stress that people might experience on the body would be headaches, stomach aches, back aches, high blood pressure, high blood sugar levels. Their heart might be racing. They might feel nauseous. In their mind, they might feel anxious or angry. They might feel sad or bitter, frustrated at the world, depressed, or hopeless. And actions. Oftentimes, people that are experiencing significant stress may have difficulty sleeping. They might oversleep. They might not eat. They may overeat. Oftentimes, we'll see increased use of substances, and that could be nicotine, it could be drugs, it could be alcohol. These are all coping mechanisms that people try to incorporate when they're experiencing stress to kind of, I guess, in many ways, numb or dull that pain. They may act out, they may break things, they might yell or scream, or as I shared earlier, oftentimes we may see withdrawal, people that are really connected or very involved in community, maybe different community functions, or they're sorry, I'm have a little coughing episode here, but we may see farmers that are they're the weekly gatherers that get together to have a coffee, and then they were there every week, but now they're there once a month, and now they're there once every 6 months, and now they're not showing up. That could be a sign that that person's experiencing a lot of stress. And so we also know that farmers have a number of uncontrollable risk factors in their occupation that can create stress. Some of them could be weather. I know in Michigan last year we had a very wet season, and so that was very difficult. Though that's a thing they can't control, but oftentimes too, that directly impacts their outcome. As I shared earlier, my family, I married into a farm family. And last year, when I was talking to my uncle, he shared that he hadn't been able to get in 10% of his crops yet. When I asked how he was doing, he said everything's good. And so as I thought about that, I thought to myself, how are things really good if you go to work and you know that you're putting in your best effort, but at the end of the day, you know that you're going to get a 10% pay cut if everything goes out if everything else goes right or perfect. And so, thinking about that impact of that, and as you go through and you think about your own situation, that's got to be very stressful. That has to increase that stress level. Oftentimes, farmers will carry large debt loads, and concerns about government regulations and being in compliance. I know that there's oftentimes change with that, and that can create a lot of stress. Machinery breakdowns, we can never predict that. But if you're right now in Michigan, we're pretty heavy into the fall harvest. If a combine goes down or something like that, those are things that we can't control, yet they create a tremendous amount of stress. High interest rates is another uncontrollable risk factor that farmers face. Crop yields. Every year, I was talking with my father-in-law, and every year each farmer plans on going in and having a bin buster season. And he said oftentimes never happens that way. But, those are things that you can't predict, yet they also impact all of these different operations, the livelihood of the farm, your income for your farm family, whatever that may be. Livestock illnesses. If you're a dairy farmer and you lose one animal, that comes right off the top of your income. And so how valuable that is, or that can be. Commodity prices, especially over the course of the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of influx up and down, and unpredictability about that, which can create a lot of stress. And then finally, family disagreements. This could be, there are oftentimes, I think this is Eric's observation, but oftentimes there are communication gaps or communication barriers in farmers. If you're in a partnership, what does that look like? What does that sound like? Oftentimes the right hand may not be communicating with the left hand. Maybe it's a farmer that is in the dairy operation, and brother or sister want to get out of it, but they don't know how to tell their other partner. And so those are different things that we work with and talk with. And I think things to just be aware of, what are those communication gaps? And oftentimes that will create family disagreements. And so some key points. So we've talked about a lot of the different concerns or uncontrollable risk factors and stress that farmers may encounter. And so we want to think about different ways and give you some tools and some strategies to think about what you can add to your toolbox. What are some of those things, or what are some of those strategies that might work for you if you recognize that you are experiencing a significant amount of stress? And so one of those things are the 8 dimensions of wellness. And I want you to keep in mind that there's no one size fits all for this. What works for Eric might not work for the next person. So as we go through, maybe a good idea or a good tactic could be to identify what are some of those things that might work for you and put those in your toolbox. And so when you recognize that maybe you are experiencing a lot of stress, you could say, hey, I remember this. Maybe I could try this out. And so those 8 dimensions of wellness, and we're going to talk a little bit more about them coming up, but one is physical, intellectual, financial, environmental, spiritual, social, occupational, and emotional. And so physical, any form of exercise can relieve stress. And I'll be the first person to tell you that exercise looks a lot different to me today than it did 15 years ago. But just getting out, getting moving, staying active, can really help reduce and relieve some of those stresses that you're feeling. Maybe it's a 5-minute walk, maybe it's a 15-minute jog, whatever it may look like to you, but just dedicating some time for exercise really can help relieve a lot of that stress. Intellectual, activities that engage your mind, such as reading or journals or puzzles, things that can kind of, I think, maybe get your mind off of some of the stress that you're encountering. And each person has their own different thing. If puzzles work for you, it gives you something to refocus, retrain your mind, and direct your attention in something different than maybe the current stress that you're under. Financial, money management resources. I know that financial is oftentimes a big umbrella in terms of stress that people encounter. Are there different programs? Are you involved in different opportunities that might be able to help you project, create some projections, do some planning? Those are all different things that can help balance some of that financial stress out. Will it change all of it? No, but I think most people, I think financial stress is common, and I've seen it. It can be one of the most difficult stressors that people encounter or face. Environmental, spending non-work time in maybe green or natural spaces. This sometimes can be difficult for farmers because oftentimes we may live on the farm or near the farm. But one farmer that I talked with in particular said that once I realized that the stress I was experiencing was kind of overwhelming me and taking over a lot of the different things, until I was able to control that, until I was kind of able to wrap my brain around, listen, I need to control some of these factors. They said that it was the first time that they were able to, when they walked around, they smelled the fresh cut grass. They shared that for the first time in years, they had heard the birds chirping when they went for a walk. And so just taking some of that time, they were able to recognize that they were experiencing stress. And that was one of those environmental examples that really stood out in my mind. Spiritual. If you're a religious person, you'll be able to connect with this. If not, maybe meditation or something like that. But connecting yourself with things that, again, like maybe prayer or meditation, those are things that can help relieve stress or reduce stress, give you something optimistic to think about. Social, staying in close touch with family or friends. We recently I shared on a webinar that I recently did, what an impact staying connected can be. And I think one thing that we've kind of learned over time is oftentimes the agricultural community, I think, is continuing to kind of drift away from old traditions. I read a chat earlier about, I miss seeing the people and having pizza for lunch. And I think that remains true, really in today, and just making those efforts to reach out and connect can really help recharge the batteries. It's an opportunity to maybe vent, troubleshoot, but also just that opportunity to connect with peers, connect with people that you are close with, maybe they have commonalities with, that can really help reduce a lot of stress. Occupationally, allowing yourself time to recharge or establish some work-life boundaries. This is particularly difficult with a lot of the farmers that I talk with and work with, because again, many times we either live on the farm or close to the farm, or we're spending so many times. But one farmer that I talked with that left a really big impression in my mind shared that their spouse actually saved their life because of this. And as we talked a little bit further, they said that during a most difficult time in their farming career, their spouse forced them to go on vacation, because they said that when they looked out, all they seen was the work that they couldn't do, the impact it was going to have on their financial resources and assets. And so they said that even though it was financially very difficult at that time to make happen, it allowed them that opportunity to recharge the batteries, give them something to look forward to, and then also after it was over, gave them something to talk about. And they shared that that was a really impactful opportunity or impactful part of their life. Emotionally, detaching yourself temporarily from stressors and using techniques to reframe your thought. And so, one thing in the physical or in the public mental health system that I talked about time and time again was creating this physical response to redirect your thoughts. Oftentimes, if you're feeling stress or you're feeling a lot of negativity, it's easy to kind of let those kind of continue to build up. But one thing that I always suggested were, if you catch yourself thinking about the negative, physically snap your fingers and make a tally of how many times you redirect your thoughts into something positive. And I bet over the course of time, you'll start seeing your fingers snap less, because you're teaching yourself, you're training yourself to think about the positive and redirecting those thoughts from negative to positive. It doesn't happen overnight, just like a lot of the things we're going to talk about. So hopefully within that little toolbox, that gave you a few different ideas that maybe you can think about as you recognize yourself experiencing some stress. And so the next part, as I shared earlier, oftentimes in the farming communities, we see these bridges or these gaps. It wouldn't be bridges, they would be gaps in communication. And asking open-ended questions is something It's a practice skill. It doesn't happen overnight, but asking open-ended questions can really open up dialogue. It can help you get a better understanding of where people are coming from. And it stems beyond just getting the yes and no responses. That I think, because farmers are such this unique subculture and they're fiercely independent, they don't oftentimes like to expose themselves or let their guard down. And I think this is just one way to get people to talk a little bit, to learn more about maybe what some of their real stresses are. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that now. So as I kind of cheated and shared, closed-ended questions will produce yes or no answers and brief responses. Maybe you'll get a sometimes, I guess, yes, no, I don't know. Where open-ended questions will allow for a richer, deeper conversation. It will lead people to answer more fully and more honestly. And I think, like I said, this is not something that just happens overnight. And I have some examples for you that I'm going to share. So a closed-ended question, are you ready to make a decision? Oftentimes, you're going to probably get a yes or a no response for that. So are you ready to make a decision, Eric? No. And many times people that are experiencing significant amounts of stress, they may not be able to make a decision right in that moment because of all these different things that are happening. So a different way to frame that, where it would be open-ended, would be, what's holding you back from making a decision? And maybe there, going back to an example I shared earlier, could be, well, I really want to get out of this industry, but my sister is a partner in this and she works just as hard as I do, but I haven't talked to her yet. And then so right there in that example, you now know that there's another partner that's involved in the operation. There hasn't been communication between the two, and then you can kind of start from there. That can give you a baseline for that discussion. And so I won't go through all of these because I have another list too, but um, are you feeling okay? That's going to respond. I would say a majority of the time, if you ask a farmer or a member of the agribusiness community, are you feeling okay? You're going to get in, yep, I'm good. Where, how do you feel about that? Or if you went and you recognize that they were experiencing some stress, tell me about what's bothering you. And that's going to force them to go a little bit beyond just that close-ended response. And this is a skill that I think the more you practice, the better you get at it. None of this will happen overnight, but if you see yourself getting close-ended responses, I always challenge everybody too to learn from your experiences too. If you didn't get the typical response that you thought you would get, try and change it up a little bit and see what happens. So again, here are some more examples, and I won't share all of them, but an example where you'd get a close-ended response. Do you have anyone who could help you? No, I'm all alone on the farm. I work 15 hours a day. I can't afford the help. Where just changing that to more of an open-ended question. Tell me about the people that might understand your situation. Tell me about some of the people in your life. Just by switching that, you might learn about some of these different people that could play a part, that could help with decision making, that might help balance some of that stress out. And so again, being cognizant of time, because we have a short period, just thinking about these examples and talking, practicing them, can really lead to a good dialogue, especially with the farming community, getting to know what their situation is a little bit better, getting a better understanding of maybe what their real stress is. It may present as finance, but maybe it really is that they're worried that their sister doesn't know that they want to get out of the farming industry. And so, but financial is what's being presented as that concern. And so this part right here, again, I'd like suggest that everybody put their defense wall up just for a second. We're going to talk about suicide. I know that I've done a number of trainings over the years, and this can be very emotionally invoking, especially because some of us may have experienced that in our own lives or know somebody that may have lost their life by suicide. And so just take care of yourself as we go through this, but it is very important and valuable information. So, what are some warning signs of suicide? Oftentimes, somebody that's thinking about taking their life by suicide might talk about it. They may write about suicide or death. They may feel hopeless. They might feel trapped or like a burden. They may give away prized possessions. And I will be the first to tell you that I thought, prized possession would be like a large monetary gift. But I think one of the things that I've learned is that it doesn't necessarily have to be like this big monetary gift. It could be a belt buckle that Eric randomly received out of the blue and said, Eric, why did you give me this belt buckle? Well, it was great, Grandpa's. I wanted you to have it. That could be a warning sign, especially if it's encountered with some of this other stress that people might be experiencing. Are they making a plan? Um, Oftentimes in the agricultural community, we won't see people that will go out and acquire means or purchase a lethal weapon because oftentimes they already have access to those. They may say goodbyes. Could be a random out of the blue. Eric, I appreciate all of the time that you've spent with me. I finally am back on the right path. I got all my problems figured out. It could be subtle. It could be very forthcoming. Oftentimes we'll see people start isolating themselves from others. So again, going back to the earlier example about the farmer that maybe participated in the weekly coffee talks, now they're not there. They haven't showed up in an extended period of time. That could be just a warning sign for you to think about. Could also be, maybe they were very involved in the community. They served on several committees or different functions within the community, and now they're backing away from those things. Those could all be signs of stress. They could also be warning signs that they're thinking about suicide. Loss of interest in things. Again, maybe they were very involved in the sports or sports boosters or something like that, and now they just present as not having time or don't really care. It's no longer important to them, yet their whole life they were very involved and it was important to them. We may also see mood change, periods of highs or lows. Doesn't necessarily mean that somebody that is thinking about suicide would go very high and then down to very low. Oftentimes it could be just the opposite, where they're feeling really low and then they start expressing signs of like relief in some different ways. And so how do you ask somebody if they are thinking about suicide? Again, this is very difficult, but if you haven't said the word suicide, and I know it's easy to avoid, it's easy right now to walk away and grab a drink of water. But if you haven't said the word suicide, I'd encourage you to just try and say it. And the big message is we want you to ask you, or we would encourage you to ask them directly. Asking somebody if they're thinking about hurting themselves is different than are you thinking about taking your life by suicide? Because I may not be thinking about hurting myself. I very much may be thinking about taking my life. And so evidence-based research suggests that by asking somebody directly, you're not going to increase the risk that they would follow through and take their own life. And so I want to repeat that because that's a very important part. Asking somebody directly does not increase the risk that they would take their life by suicide. And I think one very memorable moment that I had recently, we did an in-person training in Savannah, Georgia, and one of the participants there followed up a week later and said we went through a lot of different scenarios and different situations and facilitated discussions. And they followed up a week later. They implemented these very things and they were able to save a farmer's life that was in a hostile situation, considering taking their life. And they were able to ask them, connect them with the right resources. And so going forward, what if someone does say yes? That was kind of a segue into this. What if someone does say yes? Many of us here are not master's level therapists. We're not master's level counselors. The biggest thing is if you're confronted with that situation, or if you yourself are thinking about it, don't leave that person alone. Call for help. Maybe you take them to the hospital. Try and connect them. The biggest suggestion would not be to say, Eric, you have all these things going for you. Everything's going to be good. I'll call you tomorrow. Okay. If they say yes, we want to connect them with the right the right resources. We want to connect them with the right help. And if it's a hostile situation or you don't feel comfortable with it, you could call 911. You're not going to do the wrong thing in that situation. Another resource, it's a difficult example to share, but if you were out maybe at a farm and you're talking with a farmer and you see these different concerns, maybe some of the things that we had talked about earlier, and they're not presenting as the way they had typically had, and you ask them that question, are you thinking about suicide? And they say yes. One resource is the National Suicide Lifeline. An example could be like, Eric, I'm really concerned about you. I appreciate you sharing that with me. I'm going to do the best I can to help you. I'm not going to leave you alone. Would you be okay with me maybe calling this lifeline here? I'll get you connected. I'll call the number, and then I will just step aside so that you can talk with them, because they're connected with counselors and therapists that are equipped to handle those situations and connect them with the right resources and direct them on how to go about that. So this is one resource. There are also a number of other resources I'll share coming up. There's the text line. If you text 741-741 GO or help, that will connect you in a similar platform, just via text, with somebody that's equipped to deal with a hostile situation like that. One thing, if you are from Michigan and you're a farmer, I'm very proud of this. MSU Extension has a teletherapy pilot project that we are working on. We have partnered with Pine Rest Behavioral Health. And so we are able to connect farmers that are experiencing stress. It doesn't have to be at a point where you feel like it is suicide. It could be, but if you're struggling with stress, if you're struggling with mental health, you're feeling kind of like the weight of the world on your shoulders, this is an opportunity for you. We do have funding for it right now too. So if you are concerned about, well, I don't have insurance or I have a high deductible, we can help offset those costs right now while funds are available. And the feedback for those that have been brave enough to step forward and try this program out has been tremendous. The other really cool thing about this program too is through this partnership, we're connecting the farmers that are interested in the services with master's level therapists that have a connection to the agricultural field. So they either are farmers themselves, they're married into a farm family, grew up on a farm, whatever that may be. But there's that level of connection, I think, and empathy for the work and the daily grind that the farmers and farming community go through. So if there's more information on that, you can go to the MSU Extension Farm Stress website. There's a lot of information out there, but please know that, especially for those of you that are from Michigan, that resource is out there and available. As I shared earlier, there are some other helpful resources here that are listed. I mentioned the 741-741 text, but there are a lot of different resources out there that are national, that anybody that is experiencing those levels of stress can connect with. And so with that, I like to open it up if there are questions. I'm going to ask too that Christy put this evaluation in the slide in the chat box for everybody. This is really important for us because it allows us to, I think, A, are we making an impact with these presentations? And B, what are some of those things that we can do? How can we move forward? How can we best support the farmers as they support us? And so if we could put that in the chat box, and if you could just take, it takes 30 seconds, it's completely anonymous too, just to remind everybody about that. So if we could just take maybe 30 seconds and fill that out, it would be very much appreciated.
Thank you, Eric, for taking the time to speak with us today about this really important and really difficult topic. We do have one question. You shared some communication tools and the open-ended line of questioning we can use to have people at least start a conversation about the issue. However, I'm sure a lot of the participants work with parents or business partners or whoever it may be who are stressed out but unwilling to recognize that they are, and would probably benefit from some of the relieving techniques you mentioned at the start of your presentation. What are some of the best methods of encouraging these individuals to take a break or consider exercising or whatever it may be to relieve stress?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of different levels, and my response to that is, what is your relationship with that person? Are you a close friend of them where you can be more upfront? Are you a business associate where you're kind of meeting them? Those approaches may look a little bit different. So I think I would keep that in mind. And I think oftentimes too, if you go in very gently but candidly to just say, Tony, I'm concerned about you. I noticed this, and this. Tell me about that. You know, this seems to be a little bit different than the last 10 years that I've known you, if we've known each other for an extended period of time. But that might be an approach if you can pull out some of those things. What's prompting you to have those concerns about their level of stress? That would be a good way to maybe address those in a gentle but direct way. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yes, thank you. One thing I would note in the chat, it appears that some individuals are having trouble getting into the link. It says they need a login. Or do you know if there's a login that you could provide?
There shouldn't be a login. I'm not sure. I can resend it out, but there shouldn't be a login for it. It should just be you should be able to plug it in.
Okay. Yeah, if you want to send us information along, and we'll double check that and add that to the chat as well.
All right, great. Thank you.
So with that, we're running close on time here, but thank you once again for joining us and speaking with us. If you have any questions you want to ask privately to Eric, you can message him directly or any of us on the NMPF team, and we'll get those questions across to Eric. So
Yeah,
thank you. Yeah,
absolutely. And I didn't mean to cut you off, but thank you all very much for the opportunity to be here today.